How's it going, friends? And welcome to episode 6 of the Cynical Den Podcast. I'm back after a week's absence. Hope you didn't miss me too much. You probably didn't miss me at all. I still managed to get a comic out, so I give myself a pat in the back for that. The things I do to get the content out on time for you guys. Appreciate my effort. Seriously, just praise the ground that I walk on. I'm so great. I'm just kidding, I really hate myself. As many of you know, I live in Australia and our internet is notoriously bad over here. I would say that it's very comparable to a third world country. You probably set up your computer at Sierra Leone and Australia and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the internet speeds. It's that bad. Recently I've been having issues with my internet, and by issues I mean it hasn't worked at all. And I'm talking about days where it's I'm completely unable to go on the internet. The modem connects fine, but the internet certainly doesn't work. So that's great. I can connect to the modem, but there's no internet. Hooray! Man, this solves all of my problems. I've been trying to contact technical support to try and get the issue fixed. And we've had this issue before in terms of the internet just flat out not working. And generally, it's because there's been some actual damage to the lines. For those of you who aren't familiar with how fucking awful our internet is over here, it's basically still running through the telephone lines. We're getting fiber optics slowly, but thanks to certain things that have happened in the government, that's been delayed tremendously. I think they started in 2010, it's 2016, and most people don't have access to the national broadband network. Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. You're really doing a public service with all that money that you make after getting elected by lying to your electorate. As for the internet, I've been trying to contact technical support to get the issue fixed, and it's been an issue for a while, but still there's been no resolution. And the internet suddenly starts working. I get worried that someone's going to come around from technical support and be like, oh, why'd you call me over here? There's no issue. Then they leave. Then the internet screws up again. Because for some reason they are wholly unable to identify what the problem is. I don't understand why the internet just doesn't work well in Australia. We're one of the most developed countries in the world. We've got really good infrastructure in most other ways. Yet when it comes to the internet, it's like fucking Somalia. It's just shit. And I know it's a first world problem. Oh, your internet doesn't work. And I mean, really, I can still use it on my phone. But when the networks try and overcharge you so much for the amount of data that you want to use on your phone. I mean, you guys want to know what the kind of plans are here? If you're paying less than $40 a month for your plan, you are one of the lucky ones. Because most plans are well in excess of that. I got a phone that I consider to be pretty good, but it was specifically a cheaper phone compared to how much you're going to have to pay in Australia if you want to get an iPhone. I can't even remember what the newest one is, 7, 8. I lost track because they're all basically the same. Or a Galaxy S7, as long as it doesn't explode in your pocket. You're going to be paying like at least $70. At least $70, and a lot of people pay a lot more than that. And the kind of data you get, oh boy, if you love getting charged $10 to use 1 gigabyte of data, come to Australia, it's fantastic. Hopefully the issue gets resolved soon. You know, I kind of like to play some games online, but at least it gives me an excuse to watch some box sets that I still need to get through. I've had The Wire for the last 6 months, and I got partway through the first season, and I don't know what happened that stopped me from watching. But I guess it's a good excuse to get back into it if the internet keeps screwing up. But then again, my PS4, for some reason, ejects discs for no reason. When I get a console, everything just works. Well, my PS4 ejects discs at any given moment for no reason. And when you try and push it back in, it pushes it back out. It means you gotta actually turn off the console, unplug it, leave it for like 5 minutes, plug it back in, and then it will tell you some spiel about how, oh, you might have corrupted your data. One day, it's gonna corrupt my data. One day, that's gonna happen. So yeah, you get a console, it just works. I've never had my PC just eject discs for no reason. Speaking of video games, Scalebound got cancelled. Isn't that just a delight? You know, Scalebound was one of the few Xbox games I was genuinely looking forward to. When it got announced, given that it was a platinum game, I was interested, but it was just a CGI trailer. And then they showed it at Gamescom 2015, and that demo, it was shaky. It looked like it was nowhere near done, given that it was running at about 15 frames per second. But it looked great. I was really looking forward to playing that game. It's just a really cool premise. You're a dude with a sword fighting a bunch of bad guys and you've got a dragon with you. I mean, where do I sign up? That's awesome. And when it's Platinum, you know that they're going to go over the top crazy. You know that the combat's going to be fast. But I'd be lying to you if I said I was totally surprised when it was cancelled. I mean, sure, I was surprised, but I almost expected it, just given how rocky the game's development has been. The game was announced over 2 years ago. I think a lot of people may have forgotten about this, but this game was announced at E3 2014. So it's been over 2.5 years since it was announced. The game was supposed to come out in 2015, then it was delayed to 2016, then it was delayed to 2017, and it was well known that Platinum and Microsoft had been butting heads. It was something of a rocky relationship. We still know very little, but from what I've managed to find, it seems that Platinum and Microsoft couldn't agree on some key things. Potentially Microsoft prioritizing visuals, whereas Platinum wanted to go for 60 FPS. Just conflicts in terms of design, and I think it was kind of jarring when we saw the 4-player co-op thing at E3 2016, I think it was, when they showed Scalebound and the 4-player co-op. I mean, Platinum doesn't really do that kind of thing. They're generally single-player focused games. So I think we can see a little bit of that conflict there. I think Microsoft owes us an explanation. I know Phil Spencer said it's better for gamers, but it really isn't. A game getting cancelled that people were looking forward to is not good for those people. I'm not thrilled about it. And I think those of us who've been looking forward to this game since it was announced 2.5 years ago, we're owed an explanation for that. You can't string us along for 2.5 years and then go, I'm sorry, not coming out. Now we're going to delete all the videos off YouTube and pretend this game never existed. However, I think the cancellation highlights a few issues with the Xbox brand, particularly in regards to game variety. Microsoft doesn't exactly have a good reputation when it comes to the variety in their first-party games. They're not as diverse as Sony and Nintendo's IPs, and that's pretty much a factual statement. Most people would agree with that. Nintendo in particular are very different from Sony and Microsoft, but when it comes to Sony, they have a pretty good variety in terms of the games that they do. Sure, they've got the ones that appeal to the mass audience, but they're willing to greenlight riskier projects. I mean, the fact that, you know, in January we've got Gravity Rush 2, which is a niche Japanese game in which the central gameplay mechanic is about manipulating gravity to attack enemies. And in February we've got Horizon Zero Dawn, which is a totally brand new IP. These are risky ventures. All you need to do is look at the movie industry to see how scared companies are of doing new things, particularly when it comes to new IPs. It's way better to just milk an existing franchise than try and start something new. And Sony has a much better reputation in terms of starting new IPs. On top of the fact that every Microsoft game is now on PC, which basically means that there are no actual exclusive games, they're generally either a shooter or a racer. Their three big franchises are Halo, Gears, and Forza, and all of these series are well over 10 years old at this stage. For a period, it looked like Microsoft were attempting to launch new IPs and expand the diversity of their games in terms of the genres and appeal that they had. But that's all collapsing now. It feels like it was just a facade. Phantom Dust was cancelled, Fable Legends was cancelled, Scalebound has been cancelled, and we don't know what the fuck is going on with Crackdown 3. The last time we saw that game was well over a year ago, and they've showed hardly anything substantial for that game. That was also announced at E3 2014. It's been 2.5 years, and there is no sign of that game. I'm concerned about the current Xbox lineup. It's really weak. Scalebound presented a good opportunity to get some appeal in Japan, which Microsoft sorely needs, because in terms of their appeal in the Japanese market, they've got none. They're getting curb stomped by Sony and Nintendo over there. And there are a lot of people over here who do like some of these Japanese games and the ideas that they have for game design over there. There's appeal in the West too for these kind of games. I know some people who got Windows 10 just to play Scalebound. I know some people who bought an Xbox One because they wanted to play Scalebound. Was it foolish since there was all the possibility that the game might not come out? I wouldn't say it's that foolish. I mean, while it may not be a great idea to buy that early, and I'm partially at fault for doing that, there's an expectation that the game's eventually gonna come out. But alas, Scalebound is no more, and because Microsoft owns the IP, it's probably never gonna come out on any other platform. I think a lot of us are sort of hoping that at the Switch event, which will have happened by the time this episode went up, which, in case anybody is wondering, is why I will not be talking about the Nintendo Switch presentation this week, but next week. But getting back on the point, there was some people who were hoping, oh, maybe Scalebound might get revived by Nintendo or Sony, but that's not going to happen. Scalebound is no more, and I doubt that we're ever going to see that game, which is a real shame. And this kind of stuff is not going to help with Microsoft's reputation. You know, people don't get happy when games that they're looking forward to get cancelled. There have been so many games that I have been looking forward to that got cancelled, and it really infuriates me when they had so much potential. Prey 2, canned. Star Wars 1313, canned. Scalebound, canned. These were all games that I was looking forward to. These were all games that could have come out because they were close to done, and yet they got dropped. It's just so disappointing. Microsoft needs to address this hole in their lineup because as far as I'm concerned, they need this appeal. They need to have more than just the same franchises over and over in the same genres that are getting stale. Let's jettison from gaming into a real world topic. I'm going to try and keep it lighthearted since that segment was a bit of a downer, but you know me, I have a habit of ruining everything. It's no surprise that journalism in the 21st century is kind of a fucking joke. People don't like journalists anymore, which is saying something considering journalists are supposed to act for the benefit of the public. Really, they should be the most trusted profession, and yet they're down there with politicians. Gone are the days of the tumultuous seekers of the truth, the people who go out and write stories for the benefit of the public because the people need to know what's going on. No, now it's more about political agendas driven by greed, and I think everybody has noticed this, at least everybody who's paying attention. While we all like to harp about how incompetent the mainstream news outlets are, and they certainly are incompetent, a lot of people also fail to acknowledge the double-edged sword that is the internet in terms of what value it brings to the world, and it brings a lot of value, but also the detriments it brings to the world. The internet has allowed talented, smart people to gain the presence they otherwise couldn't attain. It's a way for people to not go through traditional means to gain an audience or to get their opinions out or to create something. It's given so many people the ability to express themselves and get what their content is out into the world. There are so many great artists who have sort of arisen thanks to the internet. There's a lot of great channels, animators, game reviewers. You know, the internet has allowed all of these people to flourish, and that is one of the best things about the internet. However, the internet has also allowed fucking morons to broadcast their ill-informed opinions on the internet with no formal means of scrutiny. There's lower standards in terms of being able to become a journalist on the internet. You don't need a degree, you don't need to take an ethics class, you can just go on the internet, start talking about the news, and then brand yourself as a journalist. Any person can basically turn on a microphone and claim to be a reporter, yet not actually do any kind of reporting or journalism. The way that I see a journalist is someone who goes out, finds the stories, and reports the facts as they are. It's not about being impartial, because sometimes there's no need to be impartial. Some things are flat out correct or stupid. But it's more about being able to report in an unbiased fashion. You know, reporting the facts as they are. Here are the facts, here's what this side says, here's what that side says. It's not really about inserting your own opinion into it. There's a big difference between going out into the wild, finding stories and reporting it, and just citing stories that other people have found, or just compiling a whole bunch of things out of context to present your own point that furthers your own political agenda. That's not journalism, that's commentary. Of course, there's nothing wrong with being a commentator unless you're a really shit one, but commentators and journalists are not the same. One, in my opinion, has a duty to report fairly and honestly, while the other is generally going to insert their worthless opinions into what they do. Well, I know that you're here for the facts, but let me tell you what I think. This isn't bad in itself. I gotta make this clear. This isn't bad because, I mean, op-eds are basically long-winded opinions, and that's kind of what I do. But the problem arises when op-eds are mistaken for journalism or reporting the facts. You know, when you conflate these things together and people start thinking that they're irrelevant opinions of the truth, they start acting like a bunch of idiots. I don't know about you guys, but I'm always rolling my eyes when something that is very obviously driven by one's own political agenda is labeled as the truth. You know, if it's so true, I should be able to figure it out myself. The person who's made the video isn't exactly the most trustworthy source on whether or not it's the truth. Of course you think it's the truth, you made it. But just labeling something as the truth or the reality about something or here are the facts. You know, you can do that for anything. I could make a video called The Truth About Cows and claim that when you squeeze their udders, fucking Smarties come out, but that doesn't make it true. If it's so true, I should be able to figure it out for myself. I shouldn't be sitting there thinking, wait, is this true? I mean, is this really true? Some will probably think that I'm a hypocrite. I mean, you're listening to a podcast in which I'm expressing my own opinions, but I'm not a journalist. I'm a cartoonist. I make comedy videos. I write stories. My primary objective is to entertain, as well as hopefully make people think. The way I see it, as someone who works in the media, if the bulk of what you do is focused on expressing your stupid opinions on politics and the world, you're not a journalist. You're just a pundit. And chances are you're probably a shit one at that. Enough about politics, let's get into the Q&A section. Remember, if you want to ask me a question, feel free to leave your question in the comments section, and I'll get around to it in the next episode. Today's question comes from Nitrous Ride, who asks, do you think that there are any acceptable ways for developers to make money on a game with high production costs and low sales, instead of implementing microtransactions and DLC? DLC is in content deliberately being cut from the game. I've said this many times, but the current gaming landscape is very tricky and harsh. And I think really bad forms of DLC are partially a response to this reality. You know, it is driven by selfishness because there certainly are other ways of doing it. And sometimes the DLC or the microtransactions or otherwise the business practices are just outright egregious. You know, downright exploitative and wrong, especially when it comes to some franchises that are already making millions and millions of dollars. I think that it is partially sort of an ill-fated response to the fact that the gaming landscape is more risky. You've got games with $100 million budgets that need to sell like 4 or 5 million copies to break even. Now, one may assume that this form of DLC works, given that it still keeps getting implemented. If microtransactions, day one DLC, pre-order bonuses didn't work, then we wouldn't see them in virtually every game that comes out. However, I don't think that this kind of method of business practice will help when your game is failing. Yeah, this is all fine and dandy if you're making a profit. Well, at least from your point of view. From my point of view, it's exploitative and stupid. It may seem great if you're making money off of it, but if your game is failing, paid DLC is probably the worst way to go. I'm talking about multiplayer in this context. When it comes to paid DLC, in terms of single player games, as long as you're not cutting stuff out of the core game, I'd say go for it. We've seen good examples of it with the Witcher 3 expansion packs, with what they've done with Shovel Knight. You know, there are a lot of good ways to do paid DLC. But when it comes to multiplayer, it's usually maps, characters, or guns. And this is not the way to go. Failing games have low player bases, and the more game modes you have, the more that player base is going to be divided as you've got less people in each game mode. Now, this is especially exacerbated when you throw DLC into the mix. So now you've got some people who have the maps, some people who don't, so each player is in an even more limited matchmaking lobby. You know, if you've got a game of 1,000 people, 200 people bought the DLC, congrats, you can only play with 200 people if you want to play the DLC maps. You see what I'm getting at? This leads to long matchmaking times, bad connections, and then people start quitting. And that's when your game is officially dead. We've seen way too many games fall because of this. And I think this is the reason why free DLC is becoming more commonplace in a lot of games. I think Titanfall 2 is a good example of this. With Titanfall 1, a big issue was the fact that there weren't that many people playing, and this was made a lot worse by the DLC. With Titanfall 2, I can hop on at any point, regardless of which map has been added, and know that I'll still be able to play with the entire player base because they all have the maps. This does a lot in terms of the morale of the people who bought the game and their incentive to go jump back into it. Rainbow Six Siege is a good example of how a game that didn't perform well at launch can be turned into a successful popular game. To my knowledge, that game's DLC was free. I think there is some paid stuff, and there are some microtransactions, but you can still get access to all the new stuff. And when you've got free DLC, free guns, free weapons, free maps, this incentivizes people to come back to games they may have stopped playing, because if it's free content, why not? And they don't have to worry about these matchmaking issues because there's no split play accounts. Everybody's playing with the same stuff. If the support from the developer is good, word of mouth becomes pretty relevant. Word of mouth sells games. You can have all the marketing you want. You can have the flashy CGI. You can have things at Super Bowl or whatever. But what's really going to sell a game generally is word of mouth. We've seen this with tons of indie games that didn't have marketing, but that became popular thanks to, YouTube Let's Plays, people playing it saying, yeah, go pick this up. We can play it together. This is a really great game. The word of mouth is invaluable. It really can make or break a game. If someone whose opinion I trust recommends a game, I'm more likely to pick it up. And you're not going to get good word of mouth if you're completely screwing your audience, especially the players you still have. So to answer your question, continued support and free DLC are really the best way to go in my opinion, because that way it's something positive for the people who supported you, and it brings people who may not have been interested back in because, hey, it's free and it's cheaper now. With the rise of the prominence of the internet in terms of video games, we've really seen that a game can be redeemed. A game can live on, or can come back after it died with free DLC, or really good paid DLC in terms of single player games. And it's good to see, because I don't want games to fail unless they really are just fucking terrible games. But it really makes me happy to see some games turn it around and get the attention that they deserve. It may have been rocky at launch, but they stuck with their guns, they did the right thing, and it benefits them in the long run. That does it for this episode of the Cynical Den Podcast. Thanks for watching. Remember, if you want to read the comics, feel free to go to Crude Penguin, follow it on Twitter and Facebook, the website. All the links are available in the description. I'm working on some cool stuff for Crude Penguin in 2017. I'll hopefully have some kind of post explaining what I'm doing in 2017 up on crudepenguin.com very shortly. Until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode of the Cynical Den Podcast.